Hey, this is Andrew Brown, your AWS community hero, and here I have a dev side chat with you about 15 things I wish I knew about securing my AWS account. And so the reason I made this talk was that when I was first getting started with AWS, I wish someone gave me a few tips on security that I could implement on day one, and that's what I'm going to do for you here today. So I have a big long list of things that you can take home with you, and so hopefully there's something you find useful in this talk. So let's jump right into it. And the first thing on our list is all about MFA, which is multi-factor authentication. And MFA is used so that if you have an AWS account and someone's trying to log in, you're going to protect it with a second layer of authentication. And what's commonly used is your phone for that. And so the issue with phones, if you have employees or yourself, you might find you run into issues like your battery's running out of power, or you might find the app cumbersome to use. And so one way of working around that issue is getting an YubiKey, which is a hardware security device that requires no power, is a one-touch system that's going to be near the device that you authenticate. And so that's the first recommendation there. But the second part of it is making sure MFA stays enforced. Just because you have that key doesn't mean people are going to still use it. And so one way to do that is there's an AWS Config manage rule, which will check whether someone is using MFA or not. So you're going to know whether someone on your team is not using it, but you can take it a step further by setting a remediation action with AWS Config so that if somebody doesn't have MFA turned on, it's going to do something. In my case, we have this remediation action that is going to lock out all services based on a custom role. And once they turn back on their MFA, they're going to get access back to everything. So moving on to number two, this is all about traffic that is moving through your VPC. So if you are concerned about malicious traffic, the only way you're going to be able to tell the difference between malicious traffic and good traffic is if you have a baseline. You have to track what normal traffic looks like. And so one thing that you can do in your VPC is turn on VPC flow logs. And I recommend doing this super early. It only takes one button to press. And the time that you do need to determine whether you have malicious traffic or not, you're going to have the data to make that decision. One of my favorite services is cloudtrail. And I always say that cloudtrail is the service that helps you to determine who to blame because it tells you who did what and where. But the only issue there is that if you do have a breach, by default, cloudtrail only tracks 90 days of data via event history there. And so if you need to go beyond that 90-day window, you're going to actually have to go ahead and turn on a log. And this is something you should absolutely do on day one. It's really easy to do. You just name your trail, you enable it for all accounts, you ensure that no one's going to tamper with that log, you're going to enable encryption for that log, and then you want to store that somewhere very secure like an isolate AWS account. So threat detection is very easy to get started with on AWS, and one service that I want you to know about is called Amazon Guard Duty. Everyone's heard about it, but a lot of times they don't realize it's only one button to get started with the service. So as soon as you press that button and turn that on, you're going to start getting findings right off the bat, and it's going to tell you things about unauthorized access and other things like that. So it's a great service that AWS provides. But even if you are collecting data from cloudtrail and Guard Duty, you still have to make sense of it. And so AWS has a much newer service called Detective that can analyze cloudtrail logs, VPC flow logs, and Guard Duty findings. So you at least get some kind of visualization so you can make some kind of decision. Now, Detective isn't going to help you in all cases. Sometimes you have to go digging and trying to figure out what's going on there. So you might have turned on cloudtrail and it's capturing data. But the only issue is that when a security incident occurs, you don't want to be learning on the job and trying to figure it out. So what I recommend is you just get a little bit of hands-on experience so that it's not totally new when you're having an incident. And an easy way to do that with cloudtrail is if you go to the event history, they have this nice button here which allows you to create an Athena table. I'm pretty sure that AWS has some queries out there that you can use so you can play around with the data and get a lot more comfortable with it. So you have a lot of confidence if and when a security incident occurs. All right. One thing that's really important is isolation. If you isolate your workloads, you're going to have a reduced blast radius. And there's a lot of different ways of doing isolation. You have tags, VPCs. You can use IAM to do that. But these aren't an absolute guarantee of isolation. Because they can still be misconfigured. Developers can go in and change these values. So if you want a guarantee of isolation, you want to be using multiple AWS accounts, okay? And so what we can do is separate our workloads. This is called multi-account strategy. So you could have an account for development, production, business units, a security account, all sorts of things there. And if you're also wondering what is the best practices, AWS has a service called Control Tower, which will set up your account the best way possible with multi-account strategy. Now, if you're working with EC2 instances and you need to secure them, you can save a lot of time if you just go peek into the EC2 marketplace, because they already have hardened instances by third-party providers that can do a way better job than that you might be limited to based on your time and your team. And so here's one of my favorites, which is from the Center of Internet Security for Amazon Linux 2, level 1. And so there it's like $130 per year, and you don't have to worry about things being like whether they meet the demand there. So that's something I wanted you to go check out. Another thing when you're working with EC2 instances is that you usually have to log into them and do things with them. And so traditionally developers have been using SSH key pairs because that's what they're familiar with. But there are some caveats to using key pairs. They can get lost or stolen, or an old employee might be holding on to them. You don't have visibility of what's going on with these things. But AWS has this really great service called Sessions Manager. And Sessions Manager, it allows you to use no keys to connect to your instances. It'll track the history for you, and you can also restrict access via IAM, and it's one button to use, so you don't have to figure out how to use those keys whatsoever. So really great service. Highly recommend that one. The principle of least privilege is something you hear a lot, but I just want to reinforce it here, because when you are out on the internet and you're learning about AWS, you're going to come across a lot of tutorials, and they're going to say, hey, we're using admin access, full S3 access, DynamoDB full access rules, and these are managed rules by AWS, and they're okay for tutorials. But when you're running a production workload, you're not going to want to be using these managed rules. What you're going to be doing is creating your own custom IAM policies. So here's an example of IAM policy, and the two things that you should be doing is setting restricting the exact actions that you want this policy to perform and the exact resource that is using it. So just because tutorials are doing it doesn't mean it's good practice to do that. Another thing is that if you're working, or a great thing about AWS is by default, you can go global in minutes anywhere. If you want to launch an instance anywhere in the world, you can absolutely do that. But there is also a caveat to that, where is that if someone were to get into your account, they could start launching things in regions that you aren't expecting, or you don't think you're running workloads. So one recommendation is to use SCP, service control policies. It's just like writing a policy at the account level in your organizations. And what you can do is say, I'm not operating in these regions, so don't allow any services to start up there. And you can go a step further and have isolated accounts that have very particular roles like security and data science, and only allow very specific services in very specific regions. And that's going to really give you a good guarantee of security, okay? This is more of a personal tip, just because I work with AWS WAF a lot. So AWS WAF is a service that you can put in front of your your EC2 instance or your web application. And this service is really great because it can filter out a lot of bad traffic for you. But one little caveat is that you want to make sure you don't lock yourself out. And so I just want to make a personal recommendation that you allow your trusted IPs, like whatever your IP is. So if you have it in a mid panel and you need to get into it, that's something I want you to do, and just be aware of, because it's a bit of a pain when you find out later on you're locked out of your account and you're wondering out why. So if you are using multiple AWS accounts, or you're issuing multiple accounts to developers for the use of sandboxes or development environments, one thing you're going to want to do is make sure you clear out those accounts on a regular basis, just so that you don't have any expectation of anything going wrong, okay? And one really great open source project is called AWS Nuke. And what you can do is run this in your account, and it'll clear out every single service possible within your AWS account. Now, if there are accounts that you no longer want to use, and you just don't want to worry about them, you can close those accounts. And as soon as you close an account, all services within the account are going to stop. All billing is going to stop, and you do not have to worry about those accounts any longer. Compliance is something that becomes everly increasingly important as your business grows, and so you might be looking to adopt certain compliance programs. So within AWS, there's AWS Config, which allows you to set config rules, but you're going to need a package of rules to get started with. And so AWS has this great thing called conformance packs, and they have a variety of sample ones like PCI, DSS, FedRAMP, HIPAA, and a variety of other ones there. And so what you can do is you can start with one of these templates and then add on what you want. It's a really great thing to get started with compliance, and it's readily available. So I definitely recommend you go ahead and just turn one of these things on. Now, a very important thing is you want to avoid data leaks. And one way you can keep on top of that is with AWS IAM Access Analyzer. So the thing is that you're probably going to be sharing external identities such as S3 buckets or other resources, but not everything is meant to be shared. And so that is what the service does. It's going to continuously monitor to find things that are being shared so you are aware of them. And that is something that is really important to be aware of at all times. So this is a very easy service to turn on, and I absolutely recommend you to do so. And we're on to our last one here, and this is more of a way for you to go look for more security tips. And everyone's heard of the well-architected framework, but not everyone knows about the well-architected tool. And the well-architected tool has a section in it for security based on the security pillar. And in there, it has a really great checklist of 57 things. That's a big list, 57 things that you can do to audit your AWS accounts for security. And so if you're looking for that checklist, that is where it is. And so that's something I strongly recommend that you go check out. So, thank you for joining me for this security talk. I'm hoping that there was something you could take away and implement today, and enjoy the rest of reInvent.